Describe what it is that your research has an interest in.
Yeah, well, I think I've been around for 30 years now doing research. So do you have a long time to?
Start on day one.
Yeah, starting with day one. Yeah, no, a lot of my research is about trying to understand environment, social environment, the social dynamics of athlete development, and really looking. Started a lot of when I started looking at coaching. Then we kind of went to parents and understand the role of parents in the development of athletes. And then we really try, at some point in all this too, what's important to realize is that athletes go through different pathways of development and what they need at different stage of their development towards elite level athletes or towards engagement in sport. So really, I'm trying to understand the interaction, the complexity of all those interactions throughout an athlete development towards elite level athletes or just doing sport for fun and moving around for fun.
If there's anything that you would say you've seen a change in over those 30 years, is there one or maybe a few things that you would note?
Yeah. I think there's a bit of a shift in terms of how we understand the development of athletes. I think the work that we did on early specialization and sampling and doing different sport. I think it's now being recognized and being applied by a lot of sport organizations that you don't need to invest in one sport at a very early age and just doing that sport. And there's some negative consequences associated with that. And I think another big thing that has happened within those 30 years is how sport is used. And I think the research comes from psychology a little bit more, but looking at sport as an activity that has a lot more to offer for kids than just the development of skills, of sport skills. It can develop connections with others. It can develop people's confidence and leadership and responsibility, initiatives. So sport is ideal in terms of environment because it requires concentration. It's enjoyable. So there's not a lot of other activities in kids' life that have those elements. And it's, there's authors and research that would argue that it's better than school for the development of people because it's enjoyable. And it requires effort and concentration. So there's not a lot of activities like this in life where you have those two things working together.
I mean, I've been really talking a lot to people about how I genuinely think sport can be one of the vehicles that brings us out of some of the societal issues with young people and say the lack of social connection and the lack of even just communication skills, motivational discipline, all these different sort of psychological benefits that come from, and human benefits that come from being in sport. I think right now we're at a moment where it's almost more important than ever.
Yes. But the problem, so I think it has those possibilities and it's there and it has the structure to lead to that. But the problem that we have is the other side of that is that there's people that just look at sport as a way of developing elite level athletes and success and outcomes, sport specific outcomes. And I think that's sometimes it conflicts. And you don't create the same environment for but I think my research has been to try to argue and to provide evidence that up to a certain age, you don't need different pathways. You can have the same types of environment, and then at some point, some athletes, but at least when they're older enough to make their own decision, they can choose to get involved, 25 hours a week or 30 hours a week in a sport. And then, but you have the group that don't decide to do that to reach a high level of performance. They're still involved, and they would they will still want to be involved in sport recreationally, at a recreational level.
Yeah, this is something that I've also thought about, is that you don't necessarily need to get people involved in sport in order for them to be a champion athlete, to be a world-class athlete, to go to the Olympics, be a professional, international level, enter any more there. But kind of by aiming for the elite level of sport, by aiming for that top level, then the sort of trickle-down effect is that by bare minimum, you end up recreationally into it. But even at the elite level, you're learning such great psychological traits that could be for the betterment of you later on in life. So my take is almost, why not aim for that? Why not aim for that excellent side of it? Because then the sort of cushion is you're in it recreationally. I guess the caveat does become that if you aim at being an elite athlete and you don't quite make it, there is the sort of drawback of what it knocks on your identity, the fact that it then becomes something you pursued and you may see that as a failure, or maybe you're burnt out from that pursuit. But I still feel the what you gain from getting there is far greater.
Yeah. As long as that route to elite level is not done at the price of other benefits or developmental assets that you can acquire in sport. And I think, in some of the things that like we kind of look some of the developmental psychology literature to talk about the outcomes that should be achieved through sport, in youth sport. And we talked about the 4 C's. So I don't know if but the first one is competence. So I think any youth sports system, you want to develop competence. You want to develop cricket skill. You want to develop tennis skill. You want to develop basketball skills. So that's one aspect of sport, a very important one. But then you also need to develop confidence, connection, and character. So the 4 C's. And then when you think about this, if you work on these 4 things at the same time, then you're going to develop your elite level athletes, but you will also develop your recreational athletes that will stay engaged in sport as an adult for fun. And so if we are able to achieve that, but very often in youth sport, the emphasis is put on competence, on skill, and there's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes it's done and it's forgotten at the price of, developing athletes' confidence and connection with others and relationship and the character, the integrity and the compassion and the empathy that you can learn through sport. So I think keeping in mind those 4 C's, they're very generic, and then there's a lot of things that could fit into that. But it's a good way to understand what do we want to achieve with sport, and paying attention to each one of those dimensions.
With connection, do you mind talking a little bit more about that one? I find that one interesting. I think the others sort of speak for themselves, but connection, what does that look around?
So the connection would be, so again, it's a very big, but it would include relationships. So relationship with your parents, relationship with the coach, relationship with your peers, relationship with others, and even relationship with the community and the league and the club you're part of. So it's all so I think coaches and sports system need to understand the values that within sport you're never alone. Even if it's individual sport, there's other people around. So being able to teach and to really realize as coaches, as sport organization, as teams, that there's more healthy way to connect with others, to connect with community, and to connect with, and that's kind of what we can do with sport, because it's not done in isolation. It's done with others.
Yeah, I feel that one's the sort of pillar that is most vulnerable at the moment, with given the view on sport. And I only say this through the lens of, you're in Canada, but your neighbor America, there's I don't know if you've seen in America that there was recently a athlete that went for $7 million on a college athlete that went for $7 million to BYU on it. I can't remember the name. It's basically the new rights and image part of being a college athlete. But it was essentially they got traded for $7 million. And that for me was just something that, if you're a young athlete looking at your development in sport or your ambitions, and you see someone go for $7 million before they've actually signed a professional contract, that for me is this focus so wholeheartedly on the outcome, the money, the big shiny objects of sport before you've even actually built maybe some of these other areas of even competency or confidence and other things. So what have you, did you see that? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I did not see that, but I think, it's a big issue when you think about the U.S. in terms of a lot of youth sports system are designed to get a scholarship at a college, and now that athletes are starting to get paid, then but it really moves the outcomes. Like the outcomes is to perform, and the outcome is to develop the sport specific skill that will allow you to do this, and we kind of forget the confidence, the competence, and the confidence, the connection, and the character. And it's done in a way that it's not the most healthy way. And we know, I think, through a lot of research, and you probably heard that from your different guests on the show, that the performance at a young age is not related to performance as an adult. So if you're the best at 12 and 14 and 15 years old, we know that, and we know there's a lot of studies and a lot of research that have been able to show this. It's not how you're going to perform when you're 25 and when you're 22 years old. So that relationship does not exist. So why do we put so much emphasis on traveling teams, on performance at 12, 13, 14, out selecting the best? And we need to create a system where there's as many kids as possible to be involved, so that it would, some of them will go and invest a lot of time, but the one that don't, they won't be burned out, and they won't drop out, and they won't have injuries, which are the consequences of that early involvement, intense involvement.
And you mentioned the performance that they're trying to get to, which is they are trying to perform, but if you're a young athlete and you're ambitious and you're going through, whether it's a college system, whatever pathway you're trying to get to, that leads to you becoming a professional, you're trying to perform, but also you're trying to perform at the final end level. You should be trying to build your skill to what is it meant to be like at a professional. And I think there's a misguided vision on a lot of athletes on me having to perform right now at this age of 16, 17, 18, and then actually what it's going to take for me to perform when I turn pro. And then when you see things like this happening in college sport, where they're putting money on the value of college-based performance, those athletes still have to jump up to another level, and that's unproven. That's still not known yet. You don't even know it. Maybe they've just been dominating an era of college sport that just happens to be at a certain level right now, and they seem to be successful. So to put a price on that, and then to escalate that athlete's persona, brand, bigger than what they've actually achieved on the field, I feel it's so dangerous, because if it only fails, I mean, you hope it is successful and it continues to go upwards, but there's no knowing that there could be someone in the shadows behind you that is a late bloomer, or suddenly is going to have a last minute sort of 3-month explosion of skill and ability that suddenly becomes better than you. And what that damage could do psychologically to a player that has this huge status and then drops dramatically if it doesn't work out.
Yeah. No, it's a, when we talk about this, I think the problem that we have is we use a lot of anecdotal evidence. We use the top performers. We use I don't know. I'm trying to think, the Tiger Woods, or like that. Then we suddenly we like everybody like kind of looked and said, this is the path. This is the way to do it. But the problem with those, and you can use, Federer, or you can use Nadal, or you can use others that to make the counter argument to say that, oh, look what they did, though. But that's not healthy. That's not a very good way of talking about these things. We need to rely on bigger samples of people. And what does the research and the evidence tell us on? Because I think what happens when we look at individual anecdotal evidence like this is that there's a survivor effect that we're not looking at. And when you look at Tiger Woods, how many Tiger Woods are out there that started golf at 2 years old and that have never made it? But we don't know because we never, you just look at the one that made it. And so it's a big problem when we think about those very long-term outcomes. It takes a long time to become good at something, so we know that. But there's a lot of things that happen between that, and we don't have a lot of longitudinal study that allows us to trace that pathway. The best we have those retrospective studies that I think that has a lot to tell us. But again, we don't want to rely only on one person to make a case. And yeah.
Why do you think it is that we're so prone to doing this with young athletes, which is escalating them, or even as you mentioned there, honing in on that survivor effect of just that gets through?
Yeah, I think if you put yourself into the role of a parent, you always think that your child is special. And they're different, so I think, it's like everything else. It's like smoking, or it's like, I always think about early specialization as a risk factor. Just like smoking is a risk factor for cancer. So people, and you probably know, we all know people that are 95-year-old and smoke all their life. Does that make you think that, oh, I can smoke? Does that, so there's always going to be people, like it's a risk. So if you but I think parents would say, okay, I can do it. I can have my child specialize early, and they're not going to be injured. They're not going to burn out. They're not going to drop out, because I'm going to do it right, just like I'm going to smoke, or I don't wear my seatbelt. And, it doesn't mean you're going to die in an accident if you don't wear your seatbelt in a car. But the thing is, you have more chance at a population level to die if you drive without your seatbelt, and you get into an accident. So, but it's not a direct effect. And I think this is where people need to understand that. But people think that they are invincible. I'm going to smoke because that's fine. I'm not, it's okay for me. It's so I think my kids can specialize early because I'm going to give them good coaches and but there is a risk, and that risk may not happen, but it may. So that's why I think the message sometimes is hard to convey, because there's that very long period of time, and then people think that they can do it differently.
Have you found a moment sort of in the timeline of an athlete when you can be starting to specialize? So a sort of ideal period where you go, okay, doing many sports is good for you, but now at this moment, this is when you should really start to be, if you especially excel in one, you should be starting to push that one.
So I think definitely if you want to become an elite level athlete, at some point you're going to have to specialize. You need to invest, and so we know this too. But I guess what you're after is looking at specific age. I don't think we can look at a specific age and say you should do it, but you should do it at 14 or at 13 or at 15. It will vary between individual. It will vary between sport. To me, the big thing is, as a child, you should be able to experience different types of sport environment. So as a child, before 13, there's all kinds of research in developmental psychology that says that a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, they don't interpret winning and effort the same way that you do when you're 16. There's developmental things that happen as a kid, as a child, that you need to develop these characteristics in terms of judgment, in terms of effort, in terms of winning and losing. And I think that those are important things to develop before you start investing into something at a very high level. So having said this, I think to me what's really the key message would be that you should sample before you specialize, and you should play before you practice. So basically, if you want to become interested into something, you need to try different things. So I don't know if you like beer or wine or music, or, like, you don't go and just listen to one type of music and say, I love that. You're going to try different types of music. You're going to listen to jazz and rock, and then you're going to make your choice. And then you're going to make your decision about, I like classical, or I like jazz, or I like rock. But you could be that, you just listen to classical music and you love it and you never listen to anything else. And that's fine, but you probably miss certain things, some comparison, that gives you some comparison that gives you a little bit of a sense of making that decision. So to me, and sport would be the same thing. Why don't we let the kid experience different type of sport, different things, and when they make that decision themselves, then they have autonomy to pursue it. And then they feel like they own it. They feel like versus adults telling a kid, you're very good, you're very flexible, you should get involved in gymnastics, you're short, or you have this body type. And then suddenly the adults are telling the kids what they should be investing in. No, that's not healthy. So sample before you specialize, and then play. Experience the enjoyment of playing, kicking the ball, hitting a tennis ball without having someone telling you how to do it. That's what the fun of sport is to having those experience of playing, because you don't need to be good at something. You can just kick the ball, and that's what kids do. But I think it's important to experience that before you experience a coach telling you how to do something.
We're just sort of leading from what we were talking about, the American sports and sort of promoting athletes before or too early on in their journey and their success. Do you find that this could be, whether it's geographical, sort of from a sort of American sports only, they seem to be doing that throughout. The system seems built to specialize earlier. So you are going to be from high school all the way through to college to professional. You're going to be a footballer, basketball player, gymnast. That there is very little playing of all sports. Whereas if I think of an experience of what it's like here in the UK, and even athletes I know and have played with professionally, that I even know an athlete I work with who's a very high level cricketer and hockey player. He's still pretty young. He's 14, 15. But he's pursuing both at the same time. And I actually think if he was in America, he wouldn't be doing both. He would be one or the other. And is there anything in cultural or geographical differences in how that specialization happens?
I don't think I can speak of systematic studies that have looked at different countries. But the one thing I could speak about is that I've done a lot of research in different countries, and I've seen differences. We just wrote a paper looking at the soccer club in Norway that came out in 2021. Now I lost the name. What is the soccer player from Norway that's at top of the world? Erling, I think. Yes. So
Erling
that
Haaland.
was its club, and very small town in Norway. But basically what we've looked to that small town is that all the players that were on that team, there's a lot that made it to the professional level, but most of them and everybody on that team kind of are still playing soccer somewhere, and seems to be making a huge contribution back to society, but when you look at the environment of the club, they played a lot of different sports. They didn't just play soccer. They had a lot of fun. They had coaches that were very supportive. They live in a community that allowed them to do different things, do different sport. Very successful in school. So you look at this and you say, okay, well, there was not a push towards early specialization and investment in one thing. So I think there's certainly something about where you're born, where in those types of environment that create a structure around you where you push in certain direction. You'll push to specialize or simple different things. But that's just part of. I think we need, in some ways, if the structure is pushing towards early specialization, I think we need to kind of think about a little bit of alternative structure, alternative ways of doing it.
That's really interesting that you found that in Norway, that they were contributing to society as well as their sport. And so I've just come back from the Australian Open. I've spent time in the Junior Australian Open, and that for me was fascinating for many different reasons, which is why I really wanted you on the show to talk about a lot of the dynamics between coaching and players and parents and all sorts. But also something that I found was tennis is a very early specialization sport. It's an all-demanding sport at a very, very early age. But there is something that I definitely saw that sport needed, which was elements of what team sport has. So there's the athlete that you're dealing with, which is a tennis player, and majority of tennis players, and I really hated this phrase that they constantly used, which was all tennis players are selfish and they have to be. And I was like, why does a tennis player have to be selfish? Why are we branding them that this is something they have to be in order to be successful? And the fact that is just sort of spoken about in the hallways or under the table, even with athletes around, that they end up becoming it anyway. Yes, it's a single athlete sport, that everything is built towards that player trying to do well, but that doesn't create great, dynamic, adaptable athletes or human beings in that matter. And I think there are so many elements of what they don't get in their development from interacting with other athletes or maybe sampling other coaches' styles. They see many different cultures if they're touring, but they are pretty much in their own bubble throughout that whole experience. And I saw so many times when the athletes that I was around where I thought, do you know what, this thing that we're talking about here would never exist if it was in a team sport, because the dynamic of the environment would have just fixed it, and it would have created a part of you that and we wouldn't be talking about this. And so I think I've seen this where when you don't have that sampling of other sports, what it can do for you, not only as an athlete, but actually as a human being. And then, what's going on outside of the sport.
Yeah. It's interesting what you said about tennis and as an early specialization sport. I don't really like to label sport as an early specialization sport, or like why? Why is tennis an early specialization sport? Because I think, and now I'm going to be guilty of using what I said I should not be doing, but you look at players like Federer and Nadal, and you look at those players, they specialize. They may have played tennis very early, but they did a lot of other sports. So why suddenly tennis became an early specialization sport? Why? Because people are just thinking, oh, that's the best way. Adults think that's the best way to develop the skills. And if I don't, then I'm behind. But suddenly it becomes a structure imposed on a sport that has absolutely no evidence. For sure, from a skill perspective, if you want to be a tennis player, you should be playing tennis. That's we cannot argue with that. But the thing is that to be a tennis player at the pro level, you need more than just the skill of the tennis skill. You need to be able to handle the traveling. You need to be able to handle the stress. You need to be able to handle your teammates and the opponents and all. And that's what makes a champion. But the thing that we do is we just say, okay, you need a good backhand, then you need a good forehand, then you need to have a good serve. But suddenly it's like, that's not all you need.
But I saw that in the fact that you created fragile athletes. So I saw it as they were only specialized in tennis. And then when something happened to them in the game that was kind of out of their repertoire of skills, they had nothing to pull onto. And I used to think about when I played sport, even at the professional level, that there were moments where I was undoubtedly coming up against a really tough day, and it might have been a tough opponent. It might have been, I don't know, whatever it might be. And I would sort of, leaning on one of your 4 Cs of character, I would think about a day being tough. I would go, do you know what? It's not as tough as when I was working in a smoked salmon factory and I was in -25 freezers having to clean them out covered in blood and guts. And like, I've gone through tough stuff, or I've done something where it was not sport related, and I lent on that, and it got me through things. And so when you look at these athletes that are then just focused on their sport and only their sport, it creates this fragility. And sort of going on to what you were saying about why are we saying it's an early specialization sport, I don't think it comes from the athlete. I think it comes from the coaches and the parents in some sort of fear that if my kid doesn't spend all of their time focusing on this sport, it might be tennis, it might be football, hockey, basketball, whatever, and if they take a percentage of their focus away of it and take it over here, then that means that there's someone else that could take that spot. And I don't want to risk that shiny egg at the end, and I don't want to risk the achievement that's possibly there. So we're going to throw everything into it, but actually counterintuitively, it's making them more fragile at the sport they're playing.
You're entirely right. It's the adults that are structuring the environment and that are making those decisions. And then suddenly it becomes a system. And then, for sure that's going to produce elite tennis players. For sure it does. It will, because there's some of them that will just, but the thing is that, and then we say it's a good system. Well, you could have done it differently. You could have done it the Norwegian way. And maybe that would work too. But if you have 100 athletes in your system and you're doing it with a little bit more taking care about the connection and then the character and then the confidence of your athletes, and you're paying a little bit more attention to that, out of your 100 athletes, maybe there's going to be 2 that make it to the elite level, but there's going to be 98 that are still involved in sport, that are not injured, that are not burned out. Out of your 100 that are specialized early, you're still going to produce your 2, probably, but the 98 will be injured, will be burned out, they will not play tennis anymore, they will be fed up of the sport, and they will not give back. And I think, to me, that's what we need to talk about. It's not a question of producing those 2 elite level athletes. It's the question, because I think you could argue and you could make the argument that the early specialized will achieve that, but there's going to be a very big price. And, and that price is not it could be to them, certainly, but it could be to the others too that don't make it.
Well, I think tennis is a great example right now. We're going into an era of tennis where it's going to be incredibly exciting. It's in such a good place. And I think the thing that I hope for is that it will actually create an understanding that there's going to be multiple different ways that we can create champions. You look at Madison Keys, who actually won the Australian Open. She's been on tour for years. She wasn't sort of this born star that just got success straight away. It's taken her a little while to get that Grand Slam. And then we've moved on from that big 3, maybe 4 if you include Murray, of people who have just been dominating the sport. And now you go into any tournament and it could be one of 25 that could win it, which is exciting. But the journeys of all of those athletes, I don't think they're all going to be outliers. I just don't think statistically they can be that outlying specialized that's that's done it their way. Even someone like Yannick Sinner, right? He never played much junior tennis. So he sort of abolishes the idea that you have to be going through the tour and you have to be going through that. Went into senior men's tennis at an early age, and I think we could be changing in that sport specifically. It could be changing, which will be interesting to see.
Yeah. It's very interesting because I was at the Italian Open 2 years ago. I gave a talk there. And then there was a lot of people. But you look at tennis in Italy right now, it's blooming. And it's, I do work with a lot with the Italian Olympic Committee. And, I have a good friend that just talks about the kids, the number of kids playing tennis and the accessibility to tennis that is provided to the players. But it is now, because there's a lot of Italian that are like in the top 25 or top 30 or...
There's loads. I mean, they were everywhere in Australian Open.
Yeah.
You're right, it's flourishing.
Yeah. But it's interesting because they see it at the ground level. It's not necessarily a tennis academy, but it's a lot of participation, lots of kids that are interested. And that's what you want. You want to create interest. And how do you create interest? You don't create interest by telling the kids what to do and how to do it and having an adult always on top of them, telling them what to do. You create interest by getting the kids to experience enjoyable, fun activities that are, and then now, and then if you can build that interest, then now you can tell them what to do. You can kind of integrate a little bit more of the skill development. And that's why playing is so crucial at a very early age. Having a lot of fun, put kids into an environment, give them access to the sports and have them experience these things. And then when they're ready, they're gonna invest and they're gonna ask for instruction. And
you spoke about them then having autonomy and essentially agency on what they do. And I am curious about that because I see athletes that some wander, and from what I just saw in Australia, some wandering in the tournaments, probably not fully knowing why they're there or the motivation behind why they're there. Some really focusing on the extrinsic motivation. So I would say a huge percentage focusing on that extrinsic motivation. And a lot of the stuff that I will talk to my athletes about is how do we foster the intrinsic motivation? So I actually really do lean on a lot of character. I'm a really big fan of character sort of being a predominant part of what they do, because even if you think about your 4 C's there, that if you lent on character and you created a strong character and who you are, and you can't really lose with that because you know what you're doing at every moment, every day. And that then for me brings a level of confidence. But also if you're building that character, there's a chance that you'll actually build your competence in something because you'll want to be developing the skill, you want to do it. And then kind of from that, connection becomes an extra part of it, right? So for me, the character is an intrinsic motivator, is something that I can be intrinsically motivated about. What do you find, or what do you think about when it comes to parents and coaches trying to foster that intrinsic motivation in their athletes? Because I see it as something that's really challenging at the moment. Maybe because the extrinsic motivations have never been louder and everyone wants to have the followers on Instagram. They want to have the trophies in the cabinet. But how do we start to foster that intrinsic motivation in those environments?
So we've been doing a lot of work on using transformational leadership. And then we have this concept of transformational coaching, which is basically, transformational leadership is a theory in business, education, medicine that has been used to explain a little bit how leaders empower their followers, and how coaches would empower, or our parents could empower their kids and their athletes. But basically, I have one sentence that I use all the time, is that you want to make kids feeling that they are important and what they do is important. So as a parent and as a coach, you want to make sure that the kids are involved in an activity because they feel that they're making a contribution and they feel that that contribution is appreciated. by you as a parent, or by you as a coach. So there's all kinds of behaviors as a leader that you can display that would allow this. So we have a set of like 11 behaviors in coaching that we have workshops that try to get coaches to think about this. But some of them, some of them is make sure they have goals, and make sure that when they achieve their goals, you tell them. And that sometime as a leader, you're showing vulnerability as a coach, acknowledging when you make mistakes, when you, as an adult, as a parent, and have these discussions. And so what does that create? It creates an environment of trust. It creates an environment where people feel that they're, we're all in this together. A big one is individualized consideration, trying to care about the person, not necessarily as an athlete, but as a coach. You want to acknowledge that the kids, the athletes, they have life outside of sport. They go to school, they have relationship, they have family. And then making sure that you acknowledge that, and then you care about that. So there's a set of behaviors as a leader, as a parent, as a coach, I think that really creates that autonomy, create that environment where athletes feel that they're cared, and that they really they can voice their opinion, they can talk, and that's the relationship you want to create as a coach and as a parent.
What about striking the balance between, you're saying you want the athlete to be able to drive their own ship, but essentially there is an element of they don't know how to drive yet, right? So for me, there has to be an element of an adult in the room to say, while we think you know what is best for you, and you do want to have that, and you might think that, there is also an element where you perhaps don't. And I'm curious to know whether, if we start to have, again, look, society as a general, that we start to kind of coddle to younger people's needs and wants, that we hand a lot of that responsibility over, but actually potentially at the cost of them, because they don't really know what they're doing. And young people want to present a confidence that they don't really have, and an ability that they haven't earned yet or built yet through just pure time and experience and knowledge. How do we balance that? How do we balance the giving them autonomy and also helping them along the way and driving that ship in the direction we know is the right way?
So the best way to think about this is thinking about developmental relationship. So it's a relationship that changes over time. And I think that's a very important thing to understand from a coach perspective, is that your relationship with your athletes cannot be the same when you start, or when they're 9-year-old and then they go to 15 or 16, or it changes over time. And the things that change is the autonomy, the control that you give to your athletes, and then you just kind of make it happen. But the goal at the end is to have your athletes being able to coach themselves, being able to get out of the house. So when you think of a parent, what is the job of a parent? The job of a parent is not to tie the shoes of your kids all their life. Like, you want to give them the tool so that they can tie their shoes alone, and that they can do their task alone. So what is the job of a parent? The job of a parent, starting at a young age, is to make them autonomous at some point. But I think it's the same thing with a coach. But the problem with coaching that we see is that coaches giving that control is a little bit, not a lot of coaches like to do that, because suddenly what am I going to do? It's like, but that's their job. That's the job of the player should go to a tournament and be able to, they don't need you. I think, that's, and there's good example of this. I don't know if you follow basketball a little bit, the Warriors, the Steve Kerr, the coach of the Warriors. A few years ago, I don't know, he was, during a timeout in basketball, like, the coach are very involved, and they tell the players what to do during timeout. And, there's, I don't know, 5 seconds, 20 seconds left in the game more. And I remember Steve Kerr not being there, completely getting out of and letting the players figure out what they needed to do. And I remember it was all over the newspaper about he's not coaching. And then he responded, I am coaching, and the players are ready. This is their game. They should be deciding what the play should be. And they're ready for that because I got them ready for that. So it's a very interesting thing, because I remember he was criticized as a coach because you should be coaching. You should tell the player, but he said no, they're ready. But that's a very good example of controlling coach versus autonomy supported coach versus kind of giving control. And that's, to me, that's the role of a coach. But it changes over time. You're not going to do that at the beginning of a season, maybe, or at the beginning of with very young players. But that's the goal. That's the goal of coaching and parenting.
There's going to be a interesting shift potentially in tennis. I know we've spoken a lot about it, but Australian Open was where they introduced the fact that you could talk to your coaches in the corner. And there was the first time where they were actually allowed to openly sort of have conversation, which will be, I think, incredible to watch what happens in games, because, I mean, tennis is a game in any instance always is on a point knife edge in which way momentum can swing. But it'll be interesting to see, maybe over more years, if this stays in, what happens to that autonomy of players, in who are the ones that are kind of driving their own ship, who actually then start succeeding more when there's actually coach interference and maybe guidance at that time. What are those coaches actually saying? And I like that instance that you use with Steve Kerr, because really think about it, when you're performing, that's not the time to be coaching. You're not learning anything in a performance. But I think too many, and I say that at the very pointy end, you probably could argue that at a developmental level, youth sports, things like that is different. But at the very pointy end in high performance sport, you don't need to be coached during your performance. You don't need to be thinking about what movements you're doing. You should have done that work by then. And if you're anxious as to why that's not going to happen, it's probably because you haven't done the work in the first place in your training. And people they make a mistake by thinking that's when we do the coaching. And that's a great example of Steve Kerr stepping away from the huddle and doing it. But in tennis, it's going to be interesting. Me as an athlete myself, right? My view was, at any one moment, if all of my coaches were to vanish off the planet of the Earth tomorrow, I will be okay. And what that then, with that mindset, with that idea and concept, what it led me to do was then every time I was with a coach, I would ask questions. So many questions about what I was doing something. So even down to the point of, if I was doing a gym session with my strength and conditioning coaches and I was doing a squat, I was asking, what am I doing here? What are the technical cues? Like, what teach me, almost to the point where I can teach someone else, but also so that if I travel miles away and I'm in a gym on my own, I'm autonomous. I can do that gym session. I know I'm doing it right. I know I'm getting it right. If I'm going to a coaching session and my coach is ill and I've had to swap someone else in, and I know all of the different reasons as to why I'm setting up a drill or why I'm doing technical work, it's because I've asked that question of the coach. And when you say about having coaches feel good about themselves, there's probably nothing better for a coach than an athlete sitting there just quizzing them endlessly and tirelessly of all the knowledge that they've got, just building their ego up, making them feel like $1 million, only for you to kind of take it and go, that coach has helped me be autonomous, and that's why I love working with this coach.
Yeah. No, and I think, it may sound like the way we're talking that we're saying coaches are not important. Coaches, in tennis, I think they're going to have to figure out what is that trigger, what is that I need to tell that athletes at some point during the game that would help them, and I think that's important, but that's getting to know your athletes, getting to know your team, getting to know the people you're working with, and not overload people with information, and especially information that are related to skill. But it's a lot more about your mental game and making sure that, it could be just a few words, but that are very well place at the right time, and that's what transformational coaching is about. It's saying the smallest little thing you can say to someone that will have the biggest effect in terms of changing and shifting their thinking or shifting what their focus if they have to.
You mentioned goals and a couple of others. Are there any other sort of really key behaviors out of those 11 behaviors you found in transformational coaching that would be helpful for people that they could pretty much implement straight away?
Yeah. You know what? Some of them would be like making sure as a coach that your athletes know why they're doing something. So providing meaning to whatever you're doing. If you're a swimming coach and you get every Wednesday morning you swim laps, it's why. Why are we swimming laps? So like what does that mean? Or you design drill, you come up with things you ask your athletes to do, but sometimes you don't explain to them. This is to work on this technique or this movement or this strategy that would allow us to get there. So I think from a motivational perspective, that's a very important aspect or behaviors of a coach. The other big one is, as a coach, making sure that you have a value system and that you are a role model. So very often you need to model the behavior that you want your athletes to do. And I use some very simple example, but you want your athletes to arrive in time for practice. Well, get there in time for practice too. You want your athletes to respect the ref. Well, you do it too as a coach, because you tell them to do something and you do something else. What is the message? So that's called idealized influence. So the role modeling, coaches sometimes, especially with kids, they don't realize how much what they do. Coaches, athletes look at you. As a parent, the same thing. You tell your kid to do something, well, you should do it yourself. And then so I think those are just a few things that we really get coaches to think about, and how is that applied to their reality. In the workshop, we really get them to discuss how are they going to plan to do that and apply those behaviors in their coaching.
Yeah, I love that. I'm a huge believer on values in coaching, just because I think if you really want to be credible as a coach, I don't think it always has to come down to the qualifications and the coaching badges. And that, while that will be important at some stage, I think you can make a lot of headway in credibility points for athletes in the way you conduct yourself. I've always used this as an example of a cricket coach here in the UK, a guy called Andy Hurry. I think he's the director of cricket at Somerset now, but he's an ex-army PT, and he ended up coaching one of the most successful teams, sort of a very dominant team, where they didn't actually get much silverware in the cabinet because they kept falling short, but the team was full of high performers, like really, really great players and huge amounts of experience. And I always used to think, like, how does this guy command a group like this? How does he tell some of these players what to do when they're either playing for England? He hadn't played the sport at their level. He'd never got anywhere near it. And then I turned up to a game and we were playing them in a 4-day match. And I got to the ground, and as you walked into the ground, their gym was on the right, and it was this floor to ceiling window wall of where the gym was, so you could just see everything going on in the gym. Got there at about 8 o'clock for breakfast at where we were, and I looked in, and there he is, pretty much putting a barbell through the windows and lifting the entire gym. He was working out, he was sweating, he was at such a high intense work rate. And I don't think it's coincidence those windows were there, because every player could come in and see him working hard. So when he would then ask them to be working hard and be disciplined, he was showing them. And I always thought that, and I thought that showing people what you do is just as important as telling them. And for me, one of my values as a coach is I will never ask a player to do something that I'm not willing to do or have done.
Yes. No, it's a great story. and what it does is that it just creates respect. It's like suddenly there's respect between the coach and the athletes, and it creates this environment where people can talk and people can relate to each other. And yeah, it's a great story.
And in your research, where do parents fit in? Where does that start to? Where do they become maybe too involved or not involved enough?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there's quite a bit of research on parents, and I think the kind of the things that we know is that parents are there. Parents are putting a lot of money, putting a lot of resources into their kids' sport. And very often the sport organization or the sports system does not acknowledge that. It's like parents are always a problem. And it's always like, we need to get them out. We need to, but I think we need to think of ways. And I'm saying this, and I think it's very easy to say when we're sitting in a chair and not in that environment. But we need to figure out a way to involve the parents better, and to make them part of that system, where they can kind of have an input and have something to say. I think we try to, so I think a lot of the issues comes from the fact that you see those behaviors, those ice hockey behaviors in Canadian hockey where parents are yelling and but it's the results of something that happens, that it's not everything is transparent. Not everything is, coaches don't really talk to the parents. Organization, do they know what's going on, So I think we need to have a little bit of better integration of what parents do, and how they can help with the system. Or I have a student now, who's a doctor student, who's doing some work. She's a professional mountain biker, mountain bike, and the way she started in mountain bike was with her dad. And she came across this concept. There's not a lot of research, but of co-participation. So basically, instead of as a parent, instead of dropping your kids to the soccer field or the tennis court and then go shopping or do something else, or you do it with your kids. And that's how she got involved in mountain bike. So she was mountain biking with her dad, and they were going for rides. And that's how, at some point, she got into a club. But it's called co-participation because as a parent, you're just doing it with your kids. And I think tennis could be like that, You're playing tennis with your kids. You're not necessarily putting your kids into tennis lesson, but I think it's a very good way to introduce kids into sport. Not necessarily putting them into a club, into a structure right away, but as a parent, participating, and that's not coaching them. It's just doing it with them as a friend. So I guess I'm telling you all this because there's a lot of ways we can try to get the parents involved a little better in sport. We kind of put them aside, they're a problem. Let's put them, let's try to, but how can we do it in a way where it's respectful, where it's, and parents feel like they're making, they have some input, or
Yeah, I like that way you described that, almost as if like there's a lack of transparency and a lack of involvement that creates that frustration. It's kind of like if you neglect a child in the corner, it's only going to start screaming and wanting to get your
yeah,
attention, right?
in some ways,
And I think of that, the difference being from the environment I've just come from in tennis is that it is incredibly costly to get a child into tennis. Like these parents there's a lot of money that's being moved around in that sport at the junior level, and I see it as almost the financial cost for bringing your child into sport ends up almost being misconstrued as this ticket to then run the show and to be the one that creates the goals, the ambition, and it does end up feeling like you're running on the parents' ambition rather than the coaches and the athletes, because the finances has almost said, well, I'm putting in this money, I need to see sort of an ROI, and I feel like I can be in control of this, when consequently they're actually not. They're not the one that's running that ship at all. And so that's a very interesting environment that I've experienced in seeing that, because it's quite well known that tennis parents are kind of a different breed of parent in sport.
So I don't know too much, about this, but do you think that there is a lack of transparency from the coach, from the tennis organization, in terms of, because if I'm putting a lot of money into a product, if I'm going to buy something, I'm expecting something in return. If I go and buy a coffee and I don't like my coffee, I'm going to go back and they're going to give me a new one at the coffee shop, So in tennis, they're putting all that money in. So I completely understand what you're saying, but do they get something for that return? Do they get a little bit of, I know what's going on, I have a clear understanding of where I'm putting, because if that's clear from the beginning, then I think you would avoid a little bit of those, misunderstanding.
Yeah, I think there's too much transactional leadership going on in that environment. And I actually think transformational leadership is what's needed. But the mechanism to get there, in my opinion, is having these meetings where everyone is laying out each other's, having clearly defined roles, having clearly mutually agreed plans and ambitions, and doing that. Whereas I think it's transactional because, again, I think the mistake gets made by looking too much at what happens at the pro level, and then what can be potentially, this is how we do it at the junior level. So at the pro level, you see many pros chopping and changing their coaches, and this didn't work, and that we're going to bring someone else in. But at the end of the day, you're talking about an athlete that pretty much is autonomous at the end of it. A great one in the recent Aussie Open has been Djokovic and Andy Murray's partnership. You sit there and you go, what's Andy Murray telling Djokovic at that moment? He's not really probably telling him how to technically develop his game. He's probably there as a hype man, talking him through what it's like playing in an older body, being there as someone, as like a companion that he can kind of lean on and just feel that sense of camaraderie, right? So having someone who he's got in his corner. But at a younger age group, I think people just see that transactional movement of coaching and go, well, that's how you do it. It's kind of, they create that story and that narrative. But actually what I think could be done and almost should be done, and I wish I'd had that opportunity with my athlete, was to sit everyone in a room and go, what do you want? Be open and honest, be vulnerable, be really, no judgment, like in this room. Tell me what you want. Okay, your role, tennis coach, is to improve the tennis ability. The parent, you are clearly funding a lot of this, but we don't want you to not be involved, because otherwise you're going to feel like you're just funding something and not having any input, and you'll feel lonely. And then athlete, what do you want to give? What do you want to offer in that scenario? And for me, I think that's missed, because it's just either what they see is done at the top level, or they're maybe not comfortable in having those conversations. No one's actually open and honest about having those conversations, right?
Because it could feel awkward, those conversations, if parents tell you something and it's like, ooh, how do I respond to this? So,
Have you found a way in which to help people overcome that, to really embrace those challenging conversations between coach, athlete, and parent?
Yeah, because, I think explaining to the parents that your kids, they may not make it, and this is what I do, this is what I'm doing, and this is what I'm trying to achieve. And I don't only work on the skill, I also work on relationship and all the kids. And that's my club. If you're not happy with this, go somewhere else, in some ways. But I think making sure that what you're going to see in the club is what I believe, leads to better individual at the end of the day, better athletes, but also better people. And that's what you're going to get in this club. If you talk that way and you tell the parents, that's the reason why I'm doing these drills on Tuesday morning, or Thursday afternoon, or that why we're having this game, or why we're having those practices. And
Yeah.
but yeah,
I'm conscious of time, and this has been fantastic chatting to you. Really great conversation. Is there anything that you can think of in this moment in time that we're in, or maybe where we're going, a sort of move that you think is important to be made in developing great environments for athlete, coaches, parents? Where would you like to see moves being made currently? What's sort of the big thing you'd like to see?
well, I think what comes to mind is more of the kind of the last part of the discussion we had, a little bit more communication between everybody involved. Making sure that the kids have something to say, that everybody is on the same page in terms of what is it that we're here for, and the parents and the coach and making sure that we are building a sports system that is focused on the development of people, and not only the development of athletes and skill, of sport-specific skills. So I think to do that, it means that we need to have coaches that care about individuals and that care about the parents, and that. So I think yeah. And the last thing I think I'd like to say is that there's quite a bit of research showing that whatever values we have in sport and in school and at home, if the values are the same or are similar, that's how people develop. It's when there's contradictory values that are promoted in sport, and it's not the same value as it's in what we have at home or in school, then it becomes very conflicting environments for young people. And so making sure that, we, as a parent, what's happened in sport, it's also what happened at home, and the teacher, and if we can kind of agree of this is what we want to accomplish as a system, then now we have very good ground to build an environment that will develop better human beings, better people.
Incredible. Look, Jean, I really appreciate you coming on to the show. Where should people go if they want to check out your work? Where's the best place to send them?
Well, I think my email is kind of probably the best thing. I've been on Twitter, but now with everything that's going on in the world, I'm kind of.
I think join the queue, right? I think everyone's shifting, right?
It's just, well, I didn't shift. I don't check my Twitter account anymore.
Okay.
But I did go to anything else. But I think email would probably be the best thing. Or did you go somewhere else in terms of shifting from Twitter?
I just stopped using it, really. I don't really actively use it. I know people have moved over to Blue Sky.
Yeah.
For me, Instagram is a visual platform that I use.
Okay.
And I'm on LinkedIn, things like that for having connections.
Yeah, I'm not very active on social media. So emails, I think, would be the best place to find me. Yeah.
For sure. Ladies and gentlemen, Jean Côté.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed that episode with Jean, then you might enjoy even more episodes of this show. So I put together a playlist of some of the best episodes for you to get started with. All you got to do is head right here.